Okay.
Where we
Well,
go?
colleagues, tonight's a historic moment. Can you see my face okay? Yakking away? Can everybody see me talking? Wave if you can hear me talking. Okay, good. Can you see my picture? I better stop. Why don't I stop there we go. Can you see my picture better now? Okay, Hannelore, hello there.
Hi.
Anyway, I think this is a historic meeting. It's the first time that the ramifications that might arise from unionization of hospital corporations' professional staff is going to be done. It's predictable, I think, that this is going to be the first inkling of what's going to happen around the nation in many hospital ACOs. The meeting's purpose is a briefing that we hope will lead to an in-depth community consideration of today's corporate attempts to quell medicine's inflationary costs and corporate actions has resulted in unionization response of its professional workers. And that's, as I say, I think it's going to mushroom out in the United States. First, we will examine how medicine evolved into a powerful government-backed, if you will, crony, corporate cartel-like model to control inflation. The costs which we will observe are led in part by a massive managed care bureaucracy increase since the early 1990s. And I'll show you all that in a slideshow. The managed care system has failed to control costs for 5 decades. They've been trying that since 1973 HMO Act. And that includes now the very powerful industrial cartel-like model that we're dealing with tonight. Meanwhile, this model threatens the quality of patient-centered care through deprofessionalization of its clinics, which I think our physicians have felt. It threatens the ethical integrity of medicine, in my opinion, and threatens the continuation of local community medical services and threatens the financial solvency of families and the nation, in my opinion. Second, we'll hear the union members, 2 of them tonight, describe their plight in corporate medicine, followed by a scholarly review of the legal, economic, and ethical ramifications of the current system and the potential for industrial-like corporate versus union strife, which I hope that might be avoided somehow. The format is the first hour is going to be 8 speakers giving about 12 presentations, 5 minutes each, and they're going to present their message. The hour, in other words, might be 70 or 80 minutes long. We'll have to see what happens. The second hour will be an open discussion amongst the speakers, including the audience, which can use the chat function, Zoom chat function, to send messages in, which will be collected, and then the speakers can all answer those questions and respond to the comments that might come in. So then, how did we get to where we are tonight? And with that, I'm going to start a slideshow to do that. Oops, that's the wrong slideshow. Here we go. And what happened to it, Dave? Dave, my mouse has even stopped working.
Your mouse has stopped working?
My mouse has stopped working, and I have no video.
You probably minimized something.
Okay. I'm hitting the B, and I have no control here, Dave.
I cannot tell you why, sir.
The only thing I can do right now, oh, there it comes up.
Okay.
Everybody can see that, I hope. I'm going to restart the slideshow. And it's taking a long time to come up. Huh. Well, Dave, the slideshow is not coming up like it was a few moments ago.
Did you trigger it on the bottom in that little window again? Or not?
Well, I'm gonna restart it again then.
Okay.
I'm starting the video again, it says here, but it's not showing up. Well, I think I'll have to go and show the video as best we can. And boy, this is painful, Dave. I
I'm
can't see the
sorry.
video. Can you see it?
I can't see anything, remember?
Yeah, I can't see it either. And so suddenly and I can't even show, now I can see everybody there who are on the program, but I can't get this video started.
Folks will get there.
Somehow,
I do have a set.
okay, now can you see it? Let me start sharing again. Now can everybody see that?
Yep, they're saying yes.
Okay, now that's the slideshow, which is not sliding, and I'm going to turn on the slideshow itself. Now I'll try that again and see if it works. It's not working, Dave. Can you make it work?
I can't do anything from here except I could bring the slideshow up myself and do it for you like we tried yesterday.
Yeah, well, anyway, I'm not making a slideshow. Well, listen, I'm going to go ahead then. And I can't see the whole slide because the people on the right side are taking a part of the slide, Dave.
I hit your gallery view up in the top right corner again. You may have turned that off. Or speaker view, I mean.
Oh, speaker view.
Yeah.
View my profile. Wait a minute.
Top right corner.
I can't make a speaker view from here.
Mm-hmm.
My, this is difficult. I'm spotlighted. I see that.
Dave, can you bring it up and show the video?
I have it ready if he would let me do that.
Yeah,
Can
can you make that, can you hit from the current slide? So I can show the slideshow?
Yeah, I'm going to end your screen sharing, Bob. So I've got it now. Can you?
There,
see that?
great.
Oh,
Thank you. And I can't control it. Dave, can you advance the slide then?
yes, I can.
Okay. Now, first of all, hit the second next time, Dave. Yeah. And then this slide is not supposed to show up. Just go through this slide. Don't keep going.
Okay.
Yeah. Then next thing,
Next one.
this ends with wanting to go through. This slideshow is now starting to show how we got to where we are. I want you to all notice there's two great big gaps there. And from 1875, Dave, stop the advancing.
All right. All right.
And from 1875, when records were first kept, there was no inflation until after mid-1960s. And you can see what's happened. The medical cost price and consumer price index has gone up 17 sometimes, and the regular about 6 times. And that is the first time that ever happened. So in 1942, we had to get workers in the war plants, and we started the employer-based system of care to bypass the price and wage freeze, and that worked. The workers got paid extra, if you will, with insurance. Then in 1965, next hit it, Dave, advance it.
Yep.
We got Medicare and Medicaid, and then advance it once more. And when that happened, next to hit again with Dave, we had what was thought to be a panic business and everybody, a 7% crisis of inflation. That's when we had 85% of the population thinking the boss or the government paid for their care. The demand, pent-up demand was tremendous. They flocked into medicine, which had a very narrow best relatively at the time. And what the medical profession did, and all the hospitals expanded raised prices so they could attract workers and they could expand their physical plant. The politicians, on the other hand, came in 1973 and 4 and developed the HMO program, which Kip Sullivan, appellation of managed care 1.0, is perfect. We'll see 2.0 when we get to Obamacare. I want you to look at the third reference down below. Could you see my pointer?
No.
Well, anyway, the third reference down below is the HMO Act part that says that the insurance corporation can control the use of the benefits they insure. I know of no other casualty insurance company can do that, and that's a sting in the tail of the HMO Act, which has resulted in all the problems I think that's occurred since. The next point, Dave. Now, did the HMO Act help? And then the next point, we get a double digit, we get 18% inflation rate of premiums by 1988 and 89. Business people around the United States got together and had business councils. In Minnesota, we had the vice president of the Honeywell Corporation, who later became his president, as the lead. And they all decided to put their faith in HMOs and their ability to control costs. Next slide, Dave. Well, what happened is it worked. Next item, Dave. Yep, you can see the premium rates dropped dramatically to 1996 to almost 1%. Amazing. How was it done? Well, this is draconian barriers, and the public was very upset by this. They had drive-by mastectomies, they had drive-by deliveries, and Aunt Maisie couldn't get a CT scan for her throbbing headaches for a year. And when she finally got it, they found a malignant brain tumor, which killed her 2 weeks later. Next thing. Okay. So what happened that the inflation rate restarted? Well, this I call the Jack Nicholson effect. In the movie As Good as It Gets, Jack Nicholson's girlfriend vilified the HMOs on screen because she thought her child had been mishandled by the HMO. People around the United States raised out of their movie theater seats and yelled approval and clapped and cheered. This was not well publicized, but the HMOs got the message. They wore the back hats. They took the gloves off of the restricting care, and the state legislators started passing Patients' Bill of Rights. So everything was made, the inflation rate recurred. Next slide, Dave. Now, here we go down there with Jack Nicholson, and you can see what happened after him. The inflation rate of the premiums raised up to 13 to 15% by 2003. And then look at something magic happened in 2003, and that was Congress passed a real insurance bill, albeit subsidized. It still could undercut the price of the comprehensive managed care organization premiums, dropped in this slide to about 4%. And you can see how low the health plans went. And it continued there till 2009. Now, next thing. Now, see that yellow blob? Next slide, Dave. That yellow blob shows what happened after the 1990s when the HMOs came in. The number of administrators increased by 3,000% by 2009. The inflation rate or the spending rate went up to 2,300% increase. And down to the bottom, you could see the increase in the people who produced the care, the providers, if you will. They're relatively minuscule to everything else. Next slide, Dave. So here's the chief administrator talking about administrative costs. Next, Dave. This is an old slide, Dave. I can see we're in the wrong slideshow already, but this is managed care 2.0 when Obamacare passed. Obama killed the real insurance program in 2009 with regulations. Down at the bottom, you can see that Obamacare is really the essence of it is that's when your insurer is your doctor. Next slide. So a question for all. Can we do better than the powerful corporate managed care? Next, Dave. Can we do better than as good, or is this as good as it gets? Next slide, Dave. So we're going to hear the plight of the corporate medical staff and their union response. Keep going down quickly, Dave. Okay, remember, ACO hospitals and their clinicians work in a politically created system, profiteering from racially capitated fixed budget care. These hospitals aren't necessarily greedy. They have to make their ends meet by rationing care. The problem then is the system. It's not in the hospitals or their employees, it's the system. Finally, I want you to know that I did invite one of the administrators of Atlanta, I think it was one of the medical directors, and I got no response. I might add, trying to get hold of any officer at Atlanta is virtually, for a person like me, impossible. There was no way to do it. Next, Dave. With that, the slideshow is over, and I want to introduce everybody to Dr. Mick Van Hostel, who's going to take, and he and Dr. Lisa Schweiger are going to take over the next portion of the meeting, and they're the crux of it. They're going to tell us about their experience. Go ahead, Nick.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks everybody for having me. You know, I'm excited to be here and eager to share our story. You know, 2 years ago, Lisa Schweiger is a pediatric colleague of mine with Atlanta. 2 years ago, we wouldn't have been in a position where we could speak out about these things for fear of retribution. One of the things we'll get to later tonight and why we're able to do this is we have some protection because we're unionized now at speaking out, and we've been able to use our voices a lot more. So that's one reason why we're here talking tonight. So I wanted to kind of give start with a personal perspective of the way that the corporate practice of medicine has changed medicine in the last 15 years or so, just from some of my own personal observations and some of the observations that some of my colleagues who have been in the game a lot longer than me have corroborated as well. Lisa and I, Bob had sent out a link to an article he mentioned earlier this evening that was published in the Minnesota Physician in July called Healthcare at the Crossroads. And Lisa and I are both pediatricians here because we were kind of approached and asked if we'd be interested in writing an article for the Minnesota Physician. So this definitely affects the effects go far beyond just outpatient pediatrics. But that's why you see two pediatricians here today. So really, my understanding of some of the problems with the corporate practice of medicine continues to grow. I keep learning more and more, and as I keep doing that, it's interesting to see all of the history that has happened before I kind of started having my own personal experience with what corporate medicine looks like. But I do want to kind of cover my personal experience, even though I know there's a lot of history back there. I'm going to kind of cover things in broad strokes, and I understand there's a lot of subtlety and nuance to this, but just for the sake of brevity, you know, I'll be making some generalizations here. So basically, starting in medical school, I had the opportunity to participate in the RPAP program, the Rural Physician Associate Program. It's a great program run by the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis and Duluth, where they send medical students out to rural communities to practice medicine and do their rotations for 9 months. You get to know people really well. You get to see how rural medicine works, how family practice works. And, you know, once you start getting to know these docs and, you know, they start opening up and talking, you kind of get to see under the hood a little bit. So my first inkling of how things were starting to change started then and continued with my observations during residency. What we've seen in the last 15 years is clearly there have been huge changes, but it seems like there's been an absolutely breathtaking, rapid amount of change in the number of physicians who are now corporate employees just in the last 15 years. It's gone, I don't remember exactly what the statistics are, something like it's gone from something like 5% to 55%. So it's changed very rapidly. The short version is a lot of us don't feel like this is going well. Not necessarily that there is no place for a corporate healthcare model, but the way that it was done specifically and how it affected patient autonomy, physician autonomy, and a physician's rightful place in leadership in healthcare, and the way that was undermined is a huge part of the problem, and frankly has caused it has caused a disaster in a lot of places across the nation. So these changes have just been rife with broken promises. It was interesting to me from a medical student moving on through residency and now being 7 years into practice in corporate healthcare most of the time, to see the rhetoric and the justification for why these changes had to be made have changed. Initially, a lot of what I was hearing as a student and a trainee was, well, these bigger businesses, they're going to come in, they're going to help us solve some of the financial difficulties we've been having, which obviously there's a lot of history there as to why we got there in the first place. But they're going to come in, they're going to offer us these robust systems. We're going to have a lot more resources. They're going to take the administrative burden off of us. They're going to take clerical work off of us, the financial aspects, and we're going to be free to see more patients, to spend more time with their patients, to do the things that we wanted to do as physicians, and to do the things we went into medicine for. So there really was a promise. At first, the rhetoric was often a promise of a symbiotic relationship. Hey, there's some financial trouble that's going on here. You also have really heavy administrative burdens. Let us take that off of you. You guys can practice medicine. We as business people, of course, have no business in making medical decisions. Of course, we're going to leave that up to the doctors, right? Over the years, that's really changed. It has turned in from those promises to a symbiotic relationship to the justification of, well, yeah, we're going to have to make some sacrifices here because this is just how things are going to be done. And that, whether it's streamlining processes or centralizing processes, the rhetoric started to change. Fast forward to years in the future now, a lot of the rhetoric that I've heard, even from physicians in leadership, is like, well, this is just the way things are now. Like Bob mentioned, this is just as good as it gets. There's no other option. Good luck if you want to go find greener pastures. The grass is not greener on the other side. And so that it really is kind of in a nutshell that lack and loss of physician autonomy, cutting of physical and human resources for us to do our jobs, and actually paradoxically increased amounts of clerical work that physicians have had to do that have decreased the amount of time that we can spend with our patients. Corporations and even medical and non-medical administrators stepping into the exam rooms proverbially and making decisions for us, or trying to redirect the patient's priorities to align with their financial priorities. Instead of financial security, we're seeing a lot of financial insecurity in these big corporate healthcare systems, and a lot of uncertainty. Closing of clinics, closing of facilities, closing of departments and hospitals, closing hospitals entirely. This is happening not only in underserved rural areas, but in metro areas as well. What we're seeing is that adapting to this problem and trying to become more resilient is just not a solution. It's not working. With the career life expectancy of physicians is shortening. We're seeing recurrent waves of early retirement, people burning out and people leaving practice, people not going, particularly into primary care. And it's extremely concerning, the forecast of physician shortages to come in the next 10 to 15 years. We don't think it's enough to rely on the virtues of a few, to make medical decisions for all, for a few physicians to be raised into the administrative ranks. We don't think that that's enough. We've seen that, putting the decision-making into the hands of a few people who then are expected to toe the corporate line, or get fired essentially, or maybe have ulterior motives is just not enough. So there needs to be something else. We need to shore up our ability to get our voices back and retain our voices as physicians and to protect that. We can't just rely on the goodwill of corporations to allow us to make medical decisions and get some of that leadership back again. We have to protect it. We personally feel like we've exhausted all internal avenues within our organization to try to make changes. That's one of the things that led us up to this point. I'll let Lisa take it, take more of it from there. I think my time about up. I had about 7 or so minutes.
That's good. Go ahead, Lisa.
Well, hi, I'm
Thank
Lisa. Like Nick and Bob said, I am a pediatrician at Cambridge Medical Center, which is part of Alina. Been there for about 20 years. I also did the RPAP program, as Nick did. So we both have a special place in our heart for some of the smaller regional facilities and keeping those alive and well for our patients. So as Nick and Bob were alluding to, the corporatization of medicine has been, it was pretty straightforward at the beginning, but over time and insidiously, they've kind of just taken over, and we are now basically like any other employee and have been stripped of all power essentially to govern how we practice medicine and how we care for our patients. And it's created a lot of moral and ethical dilemmas for all of us. That the corporate influence of medical decision making, it basically contradicts the oaths that we have taken. As Nick said, a lot of our support staff have been taken away. We've been forced to do a lot of things that really are, we'd like to take care of our patients and still have the support that we need to do so. And instead, we're spending a lot of time doing, clicking keys on computers. And I mean, I spend probably on each day that I'm seeing patients about 6 hours seeing patients and about 2 to 3 hours just in my office doing other stuff, much of which could be done by other people. And none of that time I am paid for. I'm just paid for seeing my patients. So it's pretty crazy. This has led to burnout for physicians. The extra hours are excessive. People, like the younger folks, want to get home to their families and children. They do as much as they possibly can at the office. They miss lunch. They don't go to meetings anymore. They're just trying to have their head down at their desk and get things done. They go home and have dinner, get their kids to bed, and then they're back online doing work for another couple hours before they hit it all first thing in the morning again. People are also getting not just burnout, but morally injured. Moral injury is along the lines of burnout, but it's more than that. It means, like I said, we took an oath to do the best for our patients and not cause harm. And some of the things that we're forced to do through corporate medicine contradicts that and does lead to moral injury. Their plans also undermine the doctor-patient relationship and sow distrust. The distrust is between us and them, the corporation, but also patients start to distrust us as their physician because they can't see where the line is drawn between us and the corporation we work for. They're also stealing our privileges to care for our patients where and when they need it, and at the most important times of need. So both Nick and I, when we started at our mutual hospitals, we were a part of labor and delivery services. Within a year's time, both of our hospitals had our labor and delivery and nursery services closed down, along with one other Alina regional. That was the last straw for me. It made my life a lot easier. I'm not on call and getting called in the middle of the night or all hours on weekends, every 3 to 4 days. And yes, that's nice, but that it shouldn't have been for that reason. It devastates me every time I think about it to know that my patients are now not able to get that care. Some of them are having to now they're all having to drive to Mercy for the most part, or other smaller hospitals in the area. And it's a very long drive. And I just know, like, every year there were, so many patients that we saved the lives of, and I don't know what's happening to those patients anymore. They are taking advantage of our trust, our hardworking nature, our ethical nature, and our drive to serve our patients. They're just loading on these tasks and unpaid work and taking away our support. basically our power has been usurped. Our ability to lead has been usurped. I used to be on the medical executive committee for our hospital. And when I was first on it, we actually had a lot of say and power in how we led our hospital. Gradually, Alina basically took those powers away, and we became kind of a shadow group at that point, not really able to do a lot, but just providing information to Alina, and then Alina telling us what we needed to do. So I eventually quit that and started spending my time with Nick and others to form the union instead, because it seemed like our only option. Let's see here, where am I? Okay, so for us, our next step was, it led to unionization. We looked at our options. A small, very motivated group of us gradually grew into a slightly bigger group and got a lot bigger over time. And we figured out which union we wanted to work with, and we started organizing from there. That was in the spring of 2022. At the time, we didn't know. So we organized as a clinic group, so an outpatient group. So it's physicians, PAs, and nurse practitioners throughout all of Alina, which is more than 60 clinics, over 3,500 square miles or so. But we also didn't know another part of Alina, which were the hospital physicians at Mercy and Unity Hospital were devising the same plan and chose the same union. They're just in a different bargaining unit than us. And it just told me that we weren't alone, that they were having obviously common concerns, the same common concerns that we were. They voted in early 2023 successfully, although Alina contested it and did not recognize their union until spring of 2024. Our vote was last October, so we just had our 1-year anniversary of our successful vote. We had a very strong turnout and a very definitive win there, and Alina chose not to contest ours. And then we did begin negotiations in January. So we've been bargaining since then. The change, so far we've already created some change. Even prior to the vote, we had some success. The company gradually found out what we were doing, and they did try to bribe us in a few ways. Like, we were able to regain the annual bonus that they took away a few years before that. We got a small increase in CME for some tech money, and we did regain some improved in-basket management, although it was not enough. In addition, even prior to the vote, we put pressure on Alina by bringing forward our concern about unfair billing practices through the New York Times, and that was brought to the attention of the Attorney General. This caused pressure on Alina to change their policy. They were basically firing our patients if they had more than $2,000 of debt, which is basically a drop in the bucket. And most of these patients were, just poor and needed our care, and Alina would not work with them to figure out a plan and would just fire them. So we got them to change their policy to a more fair policy at this point. Then, since we unionized, we've done several things. During the last legislative session, we did a lot of lobbying together with the SEIU, the Minnesota Nurses Association, the Minnesota chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics, as well as the Minnesota Medical Association. We joined forces to lobby. We had some success. One thing that happened was we got a positive vote for increasing the penalty, in addition to increasing the notification period when hospitals or when corporations try to close a hospital service or close an entire hospital. So now they can still do it, but they receive more than just a slap on the hand, and they have to give a lot more notice to do so. At the time, Alina had just announced that they were going to be closing the inpatient pediatrics at Mercy and Unity, or actually at Mercy, and then they were also closing adult surgical services and ICU services at Unity. And so we tried to fight that through the legislature as well, with a bill to that was going to be like a 1-year referendum to hold off on the closure so that the state could examine that and have appropriate oversight to determine if it was an okay thing to do or not. We lost that vote, but we intend to try again and hopefully have more success in the future. We will continue to have other legislative ventures, hopefully, joining forces with those other groups because we have a lot more power when we do so. We've done petitions, press conferences, interviews, articles, community town hall meetings, op-eds, et cetera, and it's all having a positive effect for us, although slower than we'd like. Currently, Alina, just about a month ago, the sale of outpatient laboratory services went through to Quest Diagnostics, and we are currently trying to apply pressure on Alina to improve the disaster that's been. It is slowly improving, but there's a lot further to go with it. And I think the pressure we've been applying has been hastening the improvement. We're currently bargaining our first contract. We expect it to probably take in the range of about 2 years to get to that. We started in January, so we're about 9 months out right now. We're mostly through the non-economic items, maybe about 70% through that. So far, we have that they cannot deny us a reasonable request for a schedule change or a change in our patient templates. We are able to change our FTE if we wish. We have just cause protection, which means that they can't just fire us at will, which they were able to do before. We have the union to support us through any of those situations if they were to arise. We also have obtained a mentorship program for new providers. And we have gained a collaboration council, which is basically a seat at the table with Alina decision makers instead of all their decisions being made behind closed doors and us just being told about those decisions after the fact. So more to go on that. And then we will be hopefully soon moving on to the economic items like reimbursement benefits, maybe actually getting paid PTO at some point, sick and safety, better see me. And then very importantly, Alina is moving into the realm of value-based care. They chose to do that without involving us in those decisions and already have contracts out. But our union came in just in time for them not to change they're not able to change how they pay us or how we practice until they bargain with us first, which so far they've been avoiding, but they will have to do it if they want to have VBC go in effect. We can't stop value-based care, but we can have a say at the table about how it affects our practice and how it will affect our reimbursement. And we would not have had that type of power if we had not unionized. It was literally just in the nick of time. In the future, we are looking to help other groups within Minnesota to help unionize. There are multiple, pretty much every major medical system I can tell you is having interest in this. Some are further along than others. So like Bob said, I think it will become a wave. And in addition, it's happening around the country too. So we've seen a lot going on just in the last year. As we get more of them, we can also work together to I think the main thing that's going to really change medicine in our favor is going at it legislatively, because the company itself is not going to change unless they're forced to. And we can't necessarily make them change in all the ways we want, even if we have a union. But if all the unions join forces and work at the both state and national legislative levels, we might be able to do that. In the future, other things that we hope to do, well, when we go to the legislature, the first thing we're going to have to do is just make them aware. They're pretty much unaware. Most of them have no idea what's going on. They've been influenced by the company's lobbyists, or blinded, or basically bullied in some cases. So we do need to inform them and continue lobbying them. From Nick and I's perspective, the rural and regionals have been hardest hit. It's starting to move into even the suburban areas, like I said, with Mercy and Unity. But these facilities are lifelines to these communities. You can't expect all of outstate Minnesota to come to Duluth, the Twin Cities, Mayo, or maybe St. Cloud. We need these smaller hospitals. In addition, especially during COVID, we found that they were very important in offloading some of the strain of the metro facilities. In fact, my hospital has increased how many beds they're able to do, and have been providing a higher level of care for adults because we were forced to innovate during COVID and help the metro. But the hospitals or the administration, like the Central Alina and other groups, quickly forget about us. And in general, regionals are not as much money makers. We have lower seasonal volumes, especially in the summer, et cetera. And we have fewer specialties that, to be able to make the higher profits. So once they see that we're not making the profits that they like, they tend to make decisions that actively destabilize us further, and then choose to close services or close entire hospitals. So we're working on stopping that. We also
Lisa-
hope to increase
Lisa?
supply. Am I going too long? Okay,
Yeah,
sorry, I'll stop. I could go on a little bit more, but I'll stop there. Sorry.
All right. Next up, we're going to want to hear from the legal aspects of the unionization movement and why it's happened, maybe. And we'll start with John Deal or Dave Feinwalk, whichever one of you wants to go first. I can't, John. You're muted. You're muted. Unmute. There you go.
David, how do you want to do this? I know how we want to do it. I'm going to start. Oh, there you are.
Yeah, that works for me. Go ahead, hit it.
All right. So my point of view, or my piece on this is the corporate practice of medicine prohibition, which I would say is a sort of a shorthand preview, to me is the ultimate solution to all of these problems. But I want to actually start by saying I consider this, Bob Geist, a very timely and important session, and I consider it a privilege to be able to listen to these problems. I've been involved quite a bit for 55 years.
John, I did tell him your background, so I kept that hidden.
Yeah, and I sense some of this, but hearing you guys describe what you've been through on a day-to-day basis gives it a different perspective, gives life to it, and I think this is not just a big problem, it's a tragedy. Our system is more screwed up than I ever imagined, my theme is that our system is screwed up. So thank you for what you've said. I believe that the corporate practice prohibition is the philosophical, professional, legal underpinning to a solution. I'm not sure how it fits in a multifaceted path out of this and forward, but this is a term, corporate practice of medicine prohibition, that has been bandied around. I first heard it probably in 1972 as an explanation of the problems that blocked group health from establishing itself until it did in the 50s. So it was a term. I was curious about it, and I learned that this is a common, in Minnesota anyway, it's a common law legal doctrine created by the Minnesota Supreme Court, or acknowledged by the Minnesota Supreme Court as the law of Minnesota in 1933. And the premise was that a doctor owes a ethical, moral duty to his or her patient. That duty is above all else, and it's above all else. The case that got to the Supreme Court involved a businessman that arranged health screening tests, and that was declared to be illegal in Minnesota because the doctor was obliged to relate to the business, not to his patient. And that was declared illegal. The doctor who was found to have been sort of an innocent dupe in this, was disciplined slightly, and the business was put out of business. And if you look into that further, other legal scholars have written about it, is that there a contract vendor, a doctor working under an independent contract with some entity, or an employee, either one, owes a absolute legal duty to that employer or contracting party. And that presented an irreconcilable conflict of interest between those obligations and the doctor's legal and ethical duties to his patient. Unreconcilable conflict, cannot have it. The language of the court in 1933 is interesting in that at the close of sort of their statement of the legal analysis, they said, in medicine, there's no place for a middleman. And that was, that is the law in Minnesota. When we went to prepaid healthcare as a delivery system strategy in the early 1970s, people looked at the group health plan, now Health Partners, and said, well, and you may remember or know that when that law was first passed, HMOs had to be nonprofit corporations. And the fact that group health was a nonprofit corporation was sort of the model, and it became sort of folklore that removed the profit motive from the, if you will, employer or the person offering the health plan, and that we started thinking of this as a nonprofit exception to the corporate practice prohibition. But in fact, if you look at the Attorney General's office that allowed group health to come into being, it was a nonprofit corporation. The nonprofit corporation was in fact controlled by the patients, which is a huge big difference that doesn't exist in, for example, hospital nonprofit corporations. But more to the point, in the organic instruments of group health, it explicitly said that not only is it nonprofit and patient controlled, but the organization could do nothing to interfere with individual medical judgment and the doctor-patient relationship. So those details sort of got lost as there was this rush, and I was a part of it, to adopt a different sort of structural model for medicine. And by minimizing or overlooking that shall not interfere piece, while the corporate practice of medicine doctrine still exists, and I think is still extraordinarily sound policy, it sort of got minimized. And we've gone forward, health maintenance organizations, which were essentially prepaid group practice, merged into managed care, which was nevertheless under the HMO model until the 1990s, and a series of federal laws relating to health plan, federal regulation of health plans, when basically HMOs were kicked to the curb, and we have private benefit managers and network managers and so on, and they sort of exist, to my way of thinking, outside of regulation. And as the strategy has failed, the solution is to double down and to interfere more and more with patient care and medical decisions. And the enterprise takes on a greater and greater life of its own. I believe, although I've never done any research on it, wouldn't even know where to start, but it feels like the federal government has directed economic development and growth to the healthcare system as we lost employment
Anybody else
opportunities.
lose? John?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Okay. But anyway, this thing has taken on a life of its own. And just as the regulators, decision makers, attorneys general, and so on, looked inside the corporate practice prohibition and found the essence of that prohibition being the interference with medical judgment and a doctor's loyalty, singular loyalty to his patient. I think we should now look into it again and say, well, that had to do with a corporate employer or a corporate entity that acquires a patient and brings in a doctor to take care of it, and say this has to be looked at in greater practical detail, and these different payment methodologies that depend on economic indicators, that depend on corporate designed algorithms and treatment protocols and so on, those, even though the business relationship, the employment relationship may not violate the corporate practice because it fits in an exception or because it's not an employment arrangement, that payment methodology, which as a matter of fact has become so ubiquitous that if you don't develop your revenue stream as a doctor within that system, you have no revenue stream. You don't have an option. We should look at the practicality of those realities of today and say that whole system is a violation of that principle. And I feel that the path toward that is what you've done. I worry about the unionization strategy because the essence of the corporate practice goal is to preserve professionalism. Professionalism is mastery of complex and extensive knowledge and skills. It is a sense of purpose, or if you will, a calling. It manifests as the duty to our patients, and autonomy. Those are the essence, the characteristics of professionalism. Our goal, it seems to me, is to return to that. And the only thing that troubles me about the union strategy, although what I've heard this evening I'm neutral on it now because I didn't realize how bad things were, and you need a path to reconstruct your life before you can start being lofty about this stuff. But it seems to me that fighting for these things through a union is sort of the antithesis to professionalism, that is autonomy, and the power of that the position and that stature comes from within your maybe not the right word, moral standing as a professional. Now you're bargaining for that stuff under the usual tools of a collective bargaining deal, which is economic warfare. And so maybe that's an intermediate step. But I hope that the medical profession will do some soul searching. Being a dedicated professional might be less remunerative than some of these other arrangements. I think you have to assume it might be. And the people in the medical profession have to decide that their duty, their role in society, their duty to their patients is worth, and the importance of their role in this is worth whatever they may lose on the economic side, if that should happen. If people feel that way, if they feel that strongly about it, and I hope that medicine does, then physicians should rise up, assert their professional rights, and embrace their duties, and tell the decision makers, legislators, or whomever, not necessarily with a union lobbyist at the legislature, but if face to face with each legislator you happen to encounter in your town or wherever they may be, that this has just got to stop. That these business entities that gain from this and the policymakers that empowered them have ruined medicine. They have ruined a major part of our society. They've taken away the leadership and in a way, moral leadership that physicians provided in our communities. And I think it's time, join a union or whatever, and in the meantime, it's time to rise up. And I think that is going to be the ultimate solution to this.
God, I thank you very much. David, can you chip in now? Dave, unmute.
All right, I'm back.
There you go.
All right. First of all, thank you. I'm going to disagree on some things, but I think I want to start out. Dr. Geist referred to the Jack Nicholson movie and the line which Helen Hunt uttered, which caused people in theaters to leap to their feet and cheer. And I think it's important that we repeat that line this evening. The line was, "Fucking HMO bastard pieces of shit." Okay, this is what caused people to stand up and cheer. It's still true. Lisa and Nick, I want to thank you for your efforts. I believe unionization is critical, and we'll talk about that in a minute here. I want to begin by correcting something. Dr. Geist has listed in my credentials that I have an MBA. I do not have an MBA. I have an MHA, a master's degree in hospital and healthcare administration. The difference between the two degrees is that in the program I went through, there were no coursework in industrial engineering, which means that my degree is no longer fungible. It also means that not in my wildest alcohol and drug-fueled delusional status would it ever occur to me that selling laboratory services off in a hospital and healthcare system to bring money to the bottom line would somehow be a good idea. So I guess I'll never be working at Alignment. Having said that, my little piece here tonight is sort of mistitled because I believe it's called Invasion by Private Equity. That's not true. For our audience and our purposes, this should be called Metastasis by Private Equity. Private equity is a predictable, logical, and inevitable consequence of the cancer of the corporate practice of medicine. It was completely anticipated. I would like to begin by examining the good points of private equity intrusion into medical practice. Okay, now that we've got that out of the way, let's talk about the rest of it. There is a serious problem with private equity in healthcare. It is a form of financial engineering, much like the industrial engineering I just referenced, where firms use debt financing or leverage buyouts to get a hold of hospitals, health systems, physician practices, and the like. And this is an extremely risky and dangerous practice because the focus is on financial return and shareholder profitability and nothing else. The goals of these kinds of private equity ventures are very short-sighted. People look to get in and out within 5 to 8 years. They use the money that they leverage to buy the practice or the system, and they put it on the balance sheet of what they bought, thereby guaranteeing that it will sink to the bottom and ultimately end up in failure or bankruptcy. But to keep it afloat while they make their money, they have to do a couple of things. They have to cut staff, and they have to ignore patient safety protocols and other things because those are the two greatest expenses that are most easily cut to make these things work. And it's an extremely bad idea. As a result of this, you have a huge moral hazard created by this. And in my estimation, this is the reason that we're seeing a move towards physician unionization, because the cognitive dissonance that I believe that is occurring for physicians is such that they cannot disassociate themselves from their patients' well-being and their professional and ethical duty to their patients. And without unionization and without some form of collective power and action, they're either going to get fired or they're going to remain silent during this, disaster. and either of those options are unacceptable. So the other thing that we're seeing in private equity is if you look at what goes on, particularly in hospitals, falls are increasing, infections are increasing, length of stay is a little iffy. For Medicare patients, length of stay is getting better because they're afraid of the $50,000 fine for early discharge. But for other patients, length of stay is a problem. They get the bum's rush, and it's a huge issue. What's really happening here is once we engage in the financialization or the monetization or commoditization of healthcare and medicine, particularly physician practice, it's like an open invitation for people to move in and try to sell this stuff, try to to monetize it, to make a buck on it. And that's not only the primary focus, it rapidly becomes the only focus. And it becomes a huge, huge problem. We're seeing these trends occur all over, including in nonprofit systems. The notion that systems, that there's a 2 cents worth of difference between a so-called nonprofit system and a for-profit system is nonsense. Most of the nonprofit systems are busily working, trying to figure out how they can bleed off excess profitability and excess resources into the hands of not shareholders, into the hands of the management and the board. And that's going on right now. And once again, physicians watch this happen, and it's an intolerable situation, which inevitably leads to some kind of collective action. So we've created our corporate healthcare entities into these tradable assets from which financial sector participants are attracted. And I know there was some discussion about, I was a lobbyist for 40 years and technically still am. When you go to the Capitol, you will find that, everybody has UHC stock in their 401k, in their portfolio, and they have Humana stock. Nobody is going to rock the boat on these things unless they receive significant pressure, because that's what's being told them behind the scenes. You'll go down there and you'll talk to them about the breaches in patient care and patient safety. And then quietly after the meeting is adjourned, someone will come in and go, you know how much UHC stock is held in 401ks in America? You can't focus on patient well-being. You have to look at the balance sheet, or this whole thing starts to crumble. Unfortunately, the whole thing needs to crumble. Now, what are we going to do? Unionization, I believe, is clearly one step in the right direction. It would be wonderful to get the FTC to begin to look at mergers, acquisitions, and combinations, because while I believe that physicians are motivated by proper ethics and a desire to provide proper care to the patients, we can't ignore the fact that the sale of practices, as you have articulated yourself, people come in and go, look, we'll give you a bunch of money. We'll take the administrative burden off your shoulders. You don't have to keep the books. You don't have to deal with compliance. You don't have to do anything. You sell out to us. We'll handle all that stuff. You just get to devote time to your patients. That's a lie, but it sounds good, and lots of people sell. That's what fuels the sale of individual practices. At the system level, it's a little different thing, but money is still the motivator. So we need to come up with strategies to get people to understand how dangerous this is, because when I discussed this with John Deal the other day, from my perspective, we're stuck in the middle of a body of water. On one shore, we have the possibility of the government running our healthcare system, which to many people is unacceptable because there'll be delays and denials and rationing of care and a bunch of other problems. On the opposite shore is private equity and corporate practice of medicine and the privatization of our healthcare system, which has resulted in delays and denials and rationing for the benefit of shareholders, as opposed to to cover up the alleged incompetence of government. Both of those alternatives seem less than desirable, and a third way forward is needed. And our challenge is to come up with it. And so for Lisa and Nick, I'd like to see, if you want to volunteer, I'm available. So, but but that's, you know, that's my spiel on the on private equity. It is and will continue to be a disaster, and we watch what it does, and yet people seem to think, well, okay, that's capitalism, that's the American way, and to a certain extent it is. But when it comes to medical treatment and healthcare, it's too important an issue to allow that to happen. Okay, Bob, I'm done.
Okay, listen, I can't thank you and John Deal enough. Wonderful look at these things. And of course, I have the solution. You guys haven't figured it out yet. So we're going to go from that and hear from Steve Peretti. And Dave, this is now up to you to show his video. This one lasts about 10 to 11 minutes. So go ahead, Dave.
My name's Steve Parenti, and I'm an economist at the University of Minnesota. I'm really thrilled that Professor Geist asked me to come and give some comments on medical economics for this conference. I regret that I won't be able to join you in person. I'm actually teaching a class for a program that I run in Shanghai for medical industry MBA, a variety of students that are really focused on healthcare innovation, and it's interesting to really work with them in that space. But what I'd like to do is, in my brief moments with you, is share with you where I think some of the market is going. And a lot of it relates to work I've done as a professor, as a health economist, as someone who's worked in government, as someone who's been an entrepreneur, and even show you maybe a demo that you can get back to me later about what I'm thinking about. But just a little bit of background. I think that the market needs to move into a place where the medical community is able to directly engage with the patients and try to work outside of all of the third and fourth party apparatus that have been put in its place over a period of time. And I know that sounds aspirational and crazy, and what can you do? For the record, I have been on the record for saying that I've never been a fan of accountable care organizations. I still don't understand what the difference are between HMOs and ACOs, other than it's 2 or 3 decades later. And that it was a different set of actors saying that they were a great idea than Dr. Paul Elwood and Christmas Lake on his phone.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Other than that, I'm not quite sure what the differences are, other than CMS getting massively involved in a major way. That said, CMS also is involved because they're so expansive with this group Socio. And in Socio, as part of work I did working in the previous administration, the Trump administration, we had an executive order that came out that basically required all of the insurers to release their prices, their negotiated prices, and do it in a way that someone can actually use that information and put it in the public domain. So the objective was to get the insurers to put it out there, have entrepreneurs get a hold of it and write applications so that they can make those prices available, so that physicians, nurse practitioners, mostly physicians, can really be able to sell directly to consumers, sometimes self-pay, maybe through insurers. If nothing else, reveal the huge price variations that occur that are many times outside the control of providers, but really in the control of the insurers more than anything else. And so to that end, we saw the executive order take place. It was actually bipartisan in the end, that the Biden administration did not countermand it coming when it came in 2021. And then what occurred was that the Biden administration then, through CMS, or part of it called Socio, the Consumer Information Organization part of CMS, basically provided the guidelines to say that on July 1, 2022, health insurers need to start releasing all of their prices for providers in a way for anyone can download that information. Now, the insurers did do this, and they've been doing it on a monthly basis, downloading all of their prices. Blue Cross in Minnesota is doing this. United Healthcare is doing this. All the Blues plans across the nation, self-insured plans, are doing this. The data itself, you're wondering why haven't you seen it, is that the insurers made it very complex, even though they stuck to the letter of law, to have this data be usable, because while they put it in text files, ASCII, to all of us old enough to remember ASCII, I'm not a punch card person, so don't put that on me. but they also put them in JSON files, which are Java related files, and they're highly compressed to the point where one file could be a terabit. And so it's very hard actually just to use that data and put it into applications. So I at the university, I can wear different hats with disclosure. And so I'm going to tell you about two things I did because it was bothering me that this data is out there and we can't do it. As a researcher, I got a small grant and then a larger grant external to the university to get the resources of the Minnesota Supercomputer Center to actually put those prices together. And then furthermore, I made sure that when the data was coming into the university, that once we had that data, we could put it into the public domain and ideally demo it. This is the other hat to get essentially what this would look like if it was actually consumer facing. And to that extent, I basically set up a startup to self-fund to show what that app could look like on an iPhone, because what was bothering me was that it wasn't available. That was the whole dream. I've published an article. Dr. Geis can get it to you. I'll make sure I email it to you folks so you have it if you're curious. It was published in a journal inquiry to show that if that could occur, the healthcare savings, the entire system and the efficiency and what it could do for providers could be so much better. But those apps weren't there, and my forecast was for 2025. And guess what? That's next year. So if you'll indulge me, I'm going to show you a little app called My MedVita. Full disclosure, this is not part of the University of Minnesota. I've disposed it to the university. It is a startup. If you're curious about it, by all means, write to me afterwards. But here it is. So this is a little video of how this actually runs. It's called My MedVita, My Medical Life. The idea is that you can see with this interface is that it's designed to be an iPhone interface. Laura Hagen actually is just a brand new graduate that we hired to just see if we could actually make this thing work. It's actually rather challenging to make an iPhone app, by the way, just to put that out there. So we focused on the CMS shoppable services. There are 70 CPT-4 codes that CMS identified as shoppable, and many of them range from imaging, psychotherapy, some E&M codes, and others. And the thought was that these are discrete services that one would be able to shop for, understand the pricing, and buy. So for right now, we're going through an illustration of, say, psychotherapy services to see what's available. It's all searchable. The data that populates this is actually coming from that executive order. It took a supercomputer to try to decode it. Others are playing in the space that are other academics, but what's great is that you can start looking for that procedure in the area and start shopping by price and or quality metrics. We're going to try to get those in there, but you and I know that those can be very challenging. But it's a level that doesn't require United Healthcare. It doesn't require health partners. It's freestanding, and the data is required to be disclosed monthly, which means the prices should be somewhat dynamic. And there's an opportunity with this app that, let's say, you don't like your price on United Healthcare and you want to post your own price, it would allow that situation as well. This is my way of trying to address the question that Bob asked me. He said, what's the future? The future is a younger generation that want to have applications like this, to be able to use this tool, to be able, or something like this tool, to basically have their own health at their own fingertips, not beholden to an insurance company, and to feel like they own their records. And the 21st Century Cures Act makes it very clear that a patient does own their medical records. Not just the EMR part of it, but even the claims data that goes along with them. Actually, the insurers are required to hold that for a long period of time. And this app actually potentially makes that available as well. So it's a really interesting new perspective, I think, to think about it. Maybe it's too much back to the future. It's almost going back to a cash economy for physicians, except with prices that are pre-negotiated. When with such a range, that finally it lets the physician say, like, okay, yeah, I guess the group practice here, here, and here, and here, put my price in. But let me tell you what my price is, and let me put it out there. So my hope is that this isn't like just one of all the apps. There's going to be many apps that do this, but just to show that it's possible, and it could engage people, and it could change the market for the better. That's what I hope. It's a little dog and pony show. Sometimes it's, I could show you equations, I could show you a PowerPoint deck. I wish I could be with you there. But when I thought about it, and Bob asked me what would be the future, in a sense, we're going back to the future, but using modern technology to really enable a full market to make that go. And even the name which I ended up talking to other people years ago, but it makes sense to me more and more as we think about how the market is evolving. My med vita, my medical life, me, the patient, and my interaction with physicians. So thank you. I wish I could be there with you. By all means, if you want to continue this conversation, feel free to reach out and have a wonderful meeting.
Boy, very interesting. I think that may have something positive about it, as the comments by everybody here. There's a little bit of something from everybody that I think put together to make a real difference for the future. With that in mind, I want to just admonish the union people, and if a lot of people were here too and they aren't, I would admonish them too that they have the same common enemy, if you will. So with that, I'm going to read off. It only takes about 4 minutes to read, but I think the point is that we ought to be able to do away with the managed care industry and their profiteering overhead, which I showed you, that big yellow blob. The internal driver of the medical inflation is never addressed. This blob has been there forever, since the 1990s at least, and nobody ever addresses it. We need to challenge decades of social engineered managed care cost control wisdom, if you will. And secondly, do Atlanta and their medical workers have a common enemy? And my point is, I think they do. Those are what I call the mega payers. Who are they? Well, the mega payers are the CMS, controls the public sector, and the HMO industry, which controls the private sector, plus lots of the public sector. Those are the two payers. They've got all the patients, they've got all the money, and where does it go? So there's a very interesting idea out there by David Hyman and Charles Silver, two gurus in the medical economic area. And they want to go to a retail medical marketplace. That's a mainstream-like marketplace. And, excuse me, which would get rid of there would be no middleman. I thought that piece about there should be no middleman that was brought up by John Deal is very important. You get rid of that middleman and you've got a very different thing going on. It's time, I think, that we empower patients and they have real prices, which we've just heard about, and real prices for service and insurance. The time when the HMO comprehensive care industry was almost broke when we had the HSA high deductible health plans between 2004 and 2009 when Obama killed them. So I think we have a paradigm out there that would work for the private sector and for the public sector as well. And I'll later go into the public sector empowerment of patients. And Bob Koschek will also bring in some things that are happening on the national scene with that. So in conclusion, the current industrialized corporate system of cost control is itself costly and has failed cost control despite 50 years of legal empowerment to profiteer for rationing care. Rationing care is what I've been on for 50 all during years. And I'm just trying to get everybody aware of profits are okay, but hidden profits are profiteering by definition. And that's a very nasty thing. Meanwhile, the quality of the current powerful corporate cartel model of network care, cage care I call it, and profiteering from rationing care system erodes medicine's moral integrity and financial integrity. Well, with that, I think we can get an affordable system if we do away with managed care. And we'll go into a little bit about how to do that later in the program today. With that, I want to read over what Professor Bob Kennedy from St. Thomas University has sent me, and I took his rather long essay. He's just a wonderful writer and thinker, but not for 5 minutes. So I made it into 5 minutes, and it's a verbatim what he wrote. I just shortened it up a bit. So this is without any additions or editorializing. So I'm going to time myself on this, but when I've timed it, I'm under 5 minutes, I think, on it. So we're going to reset and start again. First, the experience of physicians parallels the experience of other professionals. It includes, he's been in colleges where they've unionized, not at St. Thomas, by the way. It includes curtailing of professional autonomy, which is really suppression, if not dismissal, of professional judgment. It includes the struggle with persistent budgetary constraints at the same time as the institution manages huge flows of money. The imposition of, it includes the imposition of non-professional duties. It includes the remarkable growth of non-professional staff, which may draw away resources. And this is replicated in many areas of life as a consequence of our abilities to manage massive amounts of information, which in turn leads to the corporatization and centralization of so many aspects of our lives. That's what you all have been talking about today. Second, the medical profession is a victim of its own success. Medicine today is able to routinely do what was almost unimaginable a generation or two ago. Medical advertising has created an infinite market. And he said non-infinite, but infinite market. And has encouraged the conviction that no one should be unable to access care on account of financial instability. The opportunity was therefore created for a staggering amount of money to be delivered to medical care. The metrics of success quietly but irresistibly have shifted away from when we professionals imagine is important to the preferences of investors, namely return on investment, ROI. Third, fact of the matter is that young professionals today have mostly made their peace with the new situation. The lament that we older professionals make strike our younger colleagues as quaint, but not reasons for action. In many cases, they cannot imagine any possibility of returning to what we recognize, at least, we recognize has been lost. In both medicine and education, we have traded our professional freedoms for access to technology and more pleasant physical working environments. I think we have been bought cheaply. Fourth, I have long been skeptical of the unions for professionals. There's always a trade-off. Please note that turn to contract employee, to mechanizing many functions, or sending them offshore, to transferring functions to non-professionals, and so on. All this and more has already begun in medicine, and we've heard it tonight. Unionization is likely to encourage its acceleration. Interesting. Professional unions also create internal conflicts. My stopwatch is stopped. I'm only gone 1 minute, which is baloney. Anyway, the professional unions also create internal conflict proponents often do not recognize. Nurses' unions can be an example for the physicians. They can attempt to bargain collectively, but there is little they can do in the face of management intransigence, except engage in work stoppages. This may work, but the optics for nurses, to say nothing of their personal costs, are terrible. How could physicians fare better? With proponents for unions, what might be the end game we wonder what the end game might be. Professionals in every area confront conflicts of interest. Why think that unions would be a suitable instrument for addressing your concerns in this area? The end game must consider the costs associated with success. what would physicians be willing to sacrifice to diminish the tensions of these conflicts? And end of his dissertation. Now, after this piece by Bob, I just want to keep rolling here because we're getting late in the game. And I want to make sure we finish off here in one form or another. And Bob Koshnick, if you got a few words to say about what's going on nationally.
So Bob, can you send out both that article that John Deal wrote about a year ago on the
Yes,
corporate
yes,
practice
I
of
do have
medicine, and
that,
also
and I have set it out, but I'll do it again.
the one that Kennedy, you just read off, that Professor Kennedy.
Yeah, now that Professor Kennedy's, I can also send.
Yeah, those are both great.
Yes,
I was chair of the Minnesota Medical Association policy committee, and last year, almost universal first choice of topics was corporatization of medicine and private equity. So this is really bubbling up to the top of the number one concern of physicians for the reasons that both Lisa and Dick pointed out. In terms of the loss of autonomy, I'm from Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, and we had a group of 6 physicians, and it went up to 12 from 1973 until 2008. We did not lose any primary care practitioners. Corporate medicine came in, Essential Health in this case, and I recruited, the last 8 people I recruited to the clinic have all left. It's been just a revolving door. And we totally lost our sense of autonomy, where we owned the practice. We met every month, we had a supper, we discussed things, we made decisions. When I went out in 1973, I had a choice of 123 practices. Now I suspect you'd have very few choices. And all of them, they went through the dynamics of running the practice. I just sent, before I clicked on, an article that's going to be published in Healthcare News in November. You can look at that. But for sake of time, because I think, as Dave Racer said, I'd like to open it up to questions. But so some of the things that I think, the top 6 things I think need to be done. The corporate practice of medicine, I agree with John Deal. That is the ultimate solution. It's aspirational, but I think that's the only real cure. And I also agree with what Professor Kennedy and John, and that corporatization, that unionization has its own problems. You're just putting another layer of management in there. I understand it. I support it. It's not ideal. It's hopefully an intermediate step, not the final solution. The second thing is business training. Lawyers and chiropractors have business training. Physicians don't. I brought it up as a resolution of Minnesota Academy, and they said, "Oh, that'd be too hard. We have all kinds of other stuff." But as long as you have no business training, you're going to be an employee. The third thing is having direct care, direct primary care, direct specialty care. The more you can do that, the better off. I'm a family practitioner, and direct primary care very popular with family practitioners. The next thing is the non-compete clauses. I was on the Medical Ethics and Legal Affairs Committee for years. We tried to do it, but the people in corporate medicine want to have non-competes. So we finally are making some progress, even within medicine, on the non-competes, because it basically ties you up. I encourage people to get a lawyer to look at their agreements, and a few would, and that's one of the things you can negotiate. But ultimately, we need to return power. What we do now is subsidize corporations. And in Bob's graph, I've got a more up-to-date graph that goes through 2020, where administrative costs have skyrocketed. In 2013, in the article that I sent on LIG, the average, it was 16 non-providers to one provider. I suspect it's much more than that. Okay, I've already did, my 5 minutes is already up. But the empowerment, I call it empowerment accounts. I've written several books on it. I've published a number of articles in various journals about my ideas. I call them empowerment accounts because I think we have to loosen up a health savings account to make them more desirable. And instead of having employers write off healthcare costs, make it a write-off that people can do to put the money in their own account and don't have the 20% tax penalty if you take it out ahead of time. And increase the amounts you can put in. It could really replace IRAs is what it could do. So anyway, I'd like to get back to people's questions.
Okay,
John,
I've got one,
first.
Rob, I've got one more thing to do and then we'll open it up, okay?
Okay.
Thank you. Bob, thanks very much for that. I think I wrote down 5 things and not the 6, but I made 6 out of it when you got to HSA being freed up. Okay, I don't know if that's the 6th one or not. David, can we start or I'm going to try to start the last video, which takes about 4.5 minutes.
Oh boy, I didn't know you had another video, sir. Or you mean slide set?
Slideshow, here we go.
That's the FMA one.
Oops, this is the wrong one.
I've got it ready if you need my help.
Yeah, it's the last one I sent you.
I hope it's the right one.
Okay, it's,
You want me to trigger it?
well, let's see if I can bring it up here. I thought I had it, but yeah, here it is.
Okay.
Okay, it's a way to solve all the problems that have come up tonight. And that is to get rid of the managed care organizations. And you may think that's dreamy, but it is not. To start it out is difficult. You got to start someplace. And I've been trying to get this started for over 10 years to have reformed Medicaid and put the hands in the.
Bob, at least 16 years.
Can you see it?
I can see it, but you said 10 years. It's been at least 16 years since I've been hearing you talk about this.
Well, I only got formally involved with the legalization using legislation. Legislation started in 2009 when Tom Emmer was in our House of Representatives here. He had an HOA bill. It was called, Obama quickly killed that within 2 weeks of his inauguration. So that left me to try to figure out something better. And I did that with John Shun, who was a wonderful staff member of the House of Minnesota. So let me go ahead with this. It's called a family medical account program. It's HSA-like program, essentially renamed because HSA became a nasty word for a lot of people. But it's empowering Medicaid patients and families with money on a debit card for on-site patient payment of outpatient payments. It's not insurance vouchers, and it's not insurance policies. Who was involved? Childless adults, adults with children, and they cost about 35% of the total Medicaid budget. Let's take somebody going to the ER with their debit card, and they get a $1,500 bill. What happens? $300 comes off the debit card, which is the maximum for an incident. The state picks up the 120, which makes 420 for the ER. That's 28% of usual and customary. That's 2013 legislation. In 2021, the legislature did make the rates a bit better. but they're still poor. They're 25% less than Medicare rates. So, well, how do things work today? You can see what I call the HMO box. What we do, we dump money in after the patients are put in it. And I want to just point out to you what the overhead was of this box. CMS said in 2003 that was 23.7%, and magically it dropped by 2012 to 11.6%. Connecticut found that it was 12%, fired all their HMOs and reduced their overhead to 5.2%. And before the Minnesota HMOs took over Medicaid, our overhead for our state was around 4 to 5%. I could document all that for you if you like. So what does the bill do? The bill takes all the first dollar care and puts it onto the debit card, $2,500 for an adult, $1,500 for a child. And when you get a service, the bill just goes to the bank. That's Minnesota Department of Human Services, but they are by the bill mandated to use a TPA who will simply pay the bills, whether it's a major medical expense, catastrophic, or first dollar one. One of the things we put in the bill, I think it's important, is a freebie drug with the debit card. And the nurses on the street told me the very important one was epilepsy, because the street people a lot of them are troubled with that. Lastly, how about the overhead? Well, I've cut it in half, and I think that's probably accurate. That's what happened in Connecticut when they fired their HMOs. And when you don't need the HMOs to run the system, somebody's got a debit card, we don't need them anymore. Then we get down to what large group private insurance overhead is between 5 and 8%. And the TPA debit card is very inexpensive, about 1/5 of the cost of an HMO adjudication process. And there's no clinic accounts receivable. Patients are really empowered because they've got money, just like their richer cousins at the clinic door. They can have their own physician. And it's way out of Medicaid if they're not foolish and go to the ER for sore throats. One extra gimmick is that the commissioner can at any time get reinsurance for the catastrophic costs of the Medicaid program, of this Medicaid program. Now, would this program give dollar savings? Yes. TPA debit card, you get a low transaction overhead. There's an any willing provider, which the MMA seems to want to fight all the time. More power to them, but there's no authorization necessary if they use a card. The provider payment on site means that there's no clinic accounts receivable. HMOs become totally irrelevant when patients control the money in the outpatient care system, and fundamentally, the card never runs out of money with catastrophic care. State picks it all up. So you get rid of the HMOs, and that's hegemony. And once you can do that in Minnesota, I would like to see that metastasized to all other states. That would literally put them out of business in the public sector for Medicaid. This can, since I stole the idea from Greg Scanlon, who proposed it for the Medicare system, this could easily be changed a bit to become a Medicare program as well. And the retail people are the ones that I'm looking for, because they say, why not give the patients the money instead of some corporate controller? So what are the other benefits of the program? Empower patients entrusted with money for Medicare. They get market choice and equity with their richer cousins. They're no longer welfare supplicants, but rather are families with money like their richer cousins indeed. Well, listen, I'm going to end that here. And let's open up everybody, Dave. All the people who are sitting on the sidelines, muted. Why don't we open it up and just see what questions they might have? And maybe if you have some, you can start it out.
Well, they can unmute themselves.
Okay.
I appreciated in particular John Deal's discussion about corporate practice prohibition. While you were talking, I went out and started doing some research. I'd really like to know more about that. I think it's something that we've discussed in many different forms without knowing such a thing existed. To me, it's news. I feel as a layman here, the pain of the doctors practicing, and it's a repeat of what I heard when I worked with Dr. Kajnik on his book, and with all of you that I've known for so long, what you've gone through in wanting to have a physician-patient relationship. I'm concerned, I think, too, as some of you have said, about a union becoming another piece of that, but I can see now how you need to leverage the system somehow. And lastly, I'm skeptical that if you bring your great ideas to the legislature, that the Mayo Clinic is going to sign off on them. Others, Don?
Dave, tell us more about the Mayo Clinic. Thinking, oh, this is a great idea.
Oh, Dave Feinwalk or Dave Racer?
Dave Racer.
Oh, I'm just talking about the powers that be that kill things. Other people said UHC. I just said Mayo.
Okay. Well, let's ask Lisa and Nick what their comments are after hearing all of this stuff. Lisa, how about you?
Can we bring everybody's faces up again? So I
You
can
should
see
be able to
everybody?
see them. Don't you have them all up there now?
Yeah, Lisa, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and I'd like to get your impression of what you heard tonight and what you might be doing instead, if anything.
um, I would agree, unionization, like if you would have asked me even as recently as 3 to 5 years ago, I would have said you're crazy. I mean, that's not something that that ever came to mind in my career up until more recent years. And I think it was only because we were so and are so desperate. I mean, I think I can say that not just Nick and I, but many of us spoke up to Alina in many different ways, including to the top leadership, including to local leadership about the problems we were seeing. Local leadership sometimes wanted to help, but it like I said, the power of us as individuals as well as our local facilities was insidiously usurped, and we quickly found that we did not have the ability to be involved in decision making. And so we tried. We tried and tried and tried. And then we even at one point came together as a group and chose a small number of people to represent us and go to the top leadership of Alina with the problems at hand. And they accepted the meeting, but then once they got there, Alina basically just shut them down and said, "We don't care. You will not be invited here again. You just need to toe the line." And that was it. And then that's when we all knew that there was no other option. I hope there can be a day and age where we maybe don't need a union anymore, but I also would be a little bit afraid to let it go because right now it's the only way we have any voice at this point. And it's really sad to say. So I hope you guys understand like that this was
Lisa and Nick.
Well,
This
thank you
is
very much.
Don.
Oh, Nick, what do you say?
Oh, Don, go ahead. And what were you going to say?
Well, 30 years ago, we were exactly speaking as you two just did. Minnesota had put Hillary Care in and wiped out internal medicine practices overnight. We were bought. They threatened our contract when, as good as it gets, HMOs died across the marketplace within 2 years. And they were discount fee for service, losing money on our internal medicine patients. So they were going to squeeze us. We took 6 months to look at unionization, and they threatened most of the docs who didn't show up when I went up to the offices to confront them, and I was alone. So unionization didn't start then in 1996, 97, 98. And I, in a year and a half, got out. Getting out is what I think your best option is now, which is to start a private practice, very small, for your own patients. Just like Mr. Deal has pointed out, our ultimate duty is to them. Our ultimate oath is to them. Unionization is not an answer to fix those issues. And it's viable because you have one doctor, one license, and thousands of patients available to you. You just have to run a small business. And back then, we didn't even have electronic records to be the burden. They would just cut our staff or fire them. They always have control because it's an illusion that unionization is going to bring you any more professional satisfaction or power. It's just it's a fourth party added to a crowded third party system. Patients understand, as I found out in my 21 years of solo practice, which was unique, in a big city, no one started solo practices since the 1950s because everything was gone. The unfortunate thing is Bob Kosnick, I know he's still committed to MMA, but MMA hasn't been a functioning professional organization at any level for 30 years. The AMA for 30 years as well. They're both agents of politics and just gets the docs out of doing scut work at the clinic that they no longer like because it's underpaid for what they do. I mean, so doctors have the ultimate power still. And actually, I learned it from a Blue Cross vice president, former doc, back in the 80s, is that, doc, you don't have to sign a contract. You can go work for yourself with your license. You just need a banker with a sense of humor, maybe, but it's doable. And it's one patient at a time. You need 80 square feet and some confidential records. Well, I mean, if you stay out of the third-party system, you don't need electronic records unless they're designed by you for you on behalf of making your life more efficient, not because it's mandated. It's doable, but it's different. Now, we were all used to that because we had the professional mentoring throughout our entire careers and our education. That's all absent. Someone brought up in the messaging about medical schools. They're all corporatized. They're all owned by large corporations. My Indiana University is owned as FU is owned by FU. That was their logo on their letterheads for years, a big FU. The doctors who chuckled were threatened with being fired summarily. I mean, it's a hideous system.
John, thanks. I've always loved to hear what Don has to say. He's always right on the message. Patients come first. And that's been a terrific message of his all along. John Deal, I'd like to focus back on you because everybody senses that the corporate practice of medicine is fundamentally a problem. Could you make a comment on what you heard tonight?
Well, yes, I'd be happy to. But I wanted to raise my hand and ask what union the doctors at the Lina chose to be a part of.
Doctors Council.
SEIU.
Doctors Council SCIU. Yeah, so it's like an affiliate of SCIU. So I don't totally understand the exact way those two unions kind of are connected to each other. SCIU doesn't directly control Doctors Council. It has its own president who has its own chief of staff and so on and so forth. But that's the official name.
So I would like to say a couple of things next.
Who's talking?
This is John West. I'm an OBGYN.
Oh, John West. I want to introduce everybody to John. John is an OBGYN guy, and I learned about John so many years ago. He was trying to do his best for the poorest of the poor. He absolutely could not make it on what they paid in Medicaid. So he had to go up into the corporate world like everybody else has. But John's got a heart of gold. And John, tell me what you think.
Well, I did start a practice in 2005. And one of the problems that I had is I couldn't compete with Alina to recruit partners. And the reason is as an OBGYN, every time I do a hysterectomy, the hospital gets 10 times as much as what the clinic gets. And every time you do a delivery, it's the same. So even if you're busy and you're efficient, you bring in a lot more money for the corporate physicians in your specialty in the area, and it's really not a tenable solution, even if you're willing to be paid a very low amount. You just can't attract partners to run the practice with you. The other thing is the last delivery I did for the state of Minnesota, I was paid $350 for all of the prenatal care and the delivery. And just paying for the electronic medical records that were required was $250. So you have to subsidize medical assistance. And in this instance, it was a Health Partners medical assistant patient, which Health Partners was also paid a lot more money than the $350. And they used that money to subsidize Health Partners OBGYNs physicians in the market. So there was really no option but to join the system, and to think that you can go independently when you're dependent on a hospital system is not an economic reality in the current circumstances. And we're even finding this occurring in other specialties like orthopedics, general surgery, medical oncology, et cetera, where this same kind of acquire the competition, subsidize them to eliminate the competition so you can have a monopoly is continuing. I think the corporatization of medicine is an issue, and I'm going to give a couple of examples that I thought about just while I was sitting here. So about 3 years ago, I needed some forceps. Forceps, as you all know, are instruments that you deliver babies with. So I put in my request. I had to wait until January, which was the corporate year, till they could be put on the budget. And I received them. The quality was very poor. The edges were too sharp, and I was afraid that they were going to leave marks on any baby I would deliver with them. So then I told management this issue, and they said they had signed a contract with McKesson, and unless there was patient harm, I needed to accept them and use them. So I waited, and I didn't want to use them. I used the older ones that we had. And finally, a day came up where I'd used the 2 good pairs, and I only had 1 pair left. So I went to the patient. I told her my concerns. I told her it may leave marks on her baby, and I was sorry about that, but the only other option was either to use a vacuum, which has some other risks, or to do a C-section. And she agreed to go ahead and allow me to use the forceps I didn't really want to use. Of course, they left marks. I took pictures, reported it. Because there was patient harm, I filled out a patient safety visitor report. They then finally purchased the correct forceps for me, which I now still have. About a year ago, I was down at Abbott Northwestern because I was covering call for some of my partners there. And I went to do a forceps delivery. And guess what forceps I found when I unwrapped the package? It was the same forceps that had caused harm at Mercy 2 years before. That's the first story about corporate medicine. Second, I had a patient who had done IVF 3 times, had spent over $75,000 of her own money trying to have a baby. So I wanted to order a mycoplasma test on her. Mycoplasma is a common flora, but it causes inflammation, and it can cause problems with early pregnancy losses. Alina had told me I'm not allowed to order a ureaplasma and a mycoplasma test because they said they were being ordered inappropriately. I just did it anyway, got the results, it was positive, treated her and her husband. She went and had IVF again. And 2 months ago, she delivered a healthy baby. Again, corporatization of medicine, deciding what test that I'm allowed to do to try to serve patients. Next story has to do with a patient after Cambridge closed their obstetrics unit. I was on call. The patient had called in. She hadn't felt her baby move. We told her she needed to come into the hospital as soon as she can. It took her 45 minutes to get to Mercy. I went and ultrasounded her. Her baby's heartbeat was in the 80s. We did an emergency C-section. The baby had a fetal maternal hemorrhage, which had probably started about an hour before. Her baby had to then go down to Abbott Northwestern for head cooling. Fortunately, the baby didn't die and probably won't have permanent nerve injury. But if she had been able to go to Cambridge and get care to be delivered, her baby probably would not have required head cooling. One last story.
John, can I interrupt? I hate to interrupt. We're at an hour of
Okay.
everybody should be going home, and I don't want to keep everybody, and everybody can stay as long as they want. But I do want to get to Dave Feinwachs to please give us a seventh inning stretch here and summarize sort of what you've heard tonight, Dave.
Okay, so at the end of the day, here's what I've heard as a result of all of this. Everyone agrees that the corporate practice of medicine should be prohibited, that the results of this doctrine are a bad thing. I think we all agree on that. Number two, I think that everyone agrees that eliminating the various middlemen, because there's more than one, but the various strata that separate a physician from a patient is a good thing, because they are useless and parasitic and only cause harm and add complexity to the system. I think that we all agree on that. I'm going to add one that we haven't talked about, but I think we all agree. Any three-letter acronym that ends in the letter O screws over patients. HMO, ACO, MCO, I don't care what it is, it's a bad thing. Also, I believe we all think that the healthcare transaction should be reduced as much as possible to a transactional relationship between patients and medical professionals. Now, that may not be totally possible, but it can certainly be slimmed down to a great extent. Where there's no agreement, and bringing us back around on what to do, here's the problem. If you ask me as a lawyer what we need to do to prevent, say, private equity purchasing up of practices in healthcare, I will give you a practical solution. There is something called the carried interest loophole, which allows private equity management fees to be taxed at capital gains rates, which are lower than corporate income rates. And if we eliminated that, it would create a huge disincentive. Now, try explaining that to a legislator.
Hey, Dave, stop. What was the name of that again?
It's called the carried interest loophole. It allows private equity management fees to be tracked at a capital gains rate, a much lower rate, and makes acquisition of practices much more desirable and much more profitable. And if you eliminate that loophole in the tax system, it would have a huge impact. Now, if you propose that to anybody, their eyes will glaze over, and also you'll be labeled as a communist. Because after all, you're not going to, this is a favorable tax treatment. You don't want to do that. And the reason I bring this up is, if on the other hand, you went in and said, hi, I'm from the Minnesota Physicians Council, and here's the deal. Unless you get our patient safety demands going here, we are going to strike our organization, divert patients to our competitors, and destroy this place. What do you think is more easily understandable to legislators? And any notion that the Minnesota Nurses Association hasn't had success, I'm telling you, I used to work that game. All I see is signs that say, I believe Minnesota nurses. So, unionization is not a bad thing if it's organic and your heart's in the right place. And that's editorial. I don't think we all agree on that, but that's my view. And that's what I've heard tonight.
David, that's just wonderful. I can't tell everybody here how much I appreciate their attendance and their help and the work they've done. Now, I'm going to be sending out to each of the speakers requests to put together a booklet of what they've had to say. That'll mean producing a narrative a document, if you will, so we can put the booklet together. And I hope this meeting has broken the ice so that we can start talking about unionization and why it occurred. It occurred because corporatization. And that's what I want to break into and break, actually. And I think I hear everybody else thinks it's a good idea. So please back me at any hearing we get at the legislature, because my bill ain't gonna ever pass in Minnesota with Walz as governor. And I hope other states might take it up. But I thank everybody here so much. And if you want to hang on here, I'll leave this meeting open as long as you want. I'm running out of paper to write notes on, by the way.
I'm thinking some of these doctors need to get up in the morning and go to practice with the patients. And keeping them up here is torture. Some of us need to get up and teach in the morning.
We haven't heard from Paul or Wayne.
Yeah.
Or Wayne.
Or yeah, Paul or Wayne or Wayne. Wayne.
Go ahead. Paul?
I have a historical artifact that some people might find amusing, but I'd have to be able to screen share. I'd have to be able to share my screen.
Oh,
Maybe at the next meeting.
David, can you make it happen?
Well, I'll tell you what it is. And this is maybe one of the sources of the current problems. My mother, for some reason, kept copies of all of the fee statements from my time at the then College of St. Thomas. And my tuition for the last semester, this would be the fall semester of 1964, tuition was $412.50. And the current semester tuition at St. Thomas is $26,410. That's a 6,302% increase in 60 years. So that is maybe some of the reasons that you have these. You talk about medical inflation. It can't be more than that. And I sent this copy of this statement to my children who have college-age students. And one of them is a professor at Augsburg. So never mind. It's just crazy what they're doing.
Carlton went from 1,500 to cover everything to 73,000 and not cover everything.
It's just insane.
Which unfortunately for Nick and Lisa leaves them with, or young docs under 50 with hundreds of thousands of debt, which indentures them to corporatization paychecks.
Yep.
I thought the 13th Amendment should be invoked.
There is one difference. In those days, when I was going to St. Thomas, that was the tuition. Yeah, but now the $26,410 it's a fiction. It's a sticker price, and you have to apply for do various things to get a discount from it. That's just crazy. So
well, 26 is pretty cheap, by the way, out there in big colleges, the big time colleges. Murder. By the way, I put 6 kids through college at the right time in my life. I could never afford it now. So there you go. Listen, we haven't heard from Paul Shanfield.
Well, I agree with everything people have said. I could give you examples of everything that they have already done. And, you know, I'd like to think there's some optimism, but I don't know.
I always tell people I'm an optimist at heart, but a pessimist by training.
And Paul, if I told you that we can destroy the corporations, would that make you feel better?
Yeah, if you can do it.
Well, then I'm counting on you to hit a committee if I ever get a committee hearing on the bill, because you got to start somewhere. And I think it'd be done a public program and it can metastasize out to Medicare. And I'm already in touch with Tom Emmer's office staff with that. So maybe we can get something rolling. Basically, you can put the managed care people out of business, I think, financially. And you can do it without prohibiting them by law as well. You can just put them out of business with debit cards and give him money.
You haven't been near the Potomac River near the district, have you, recently? They're about 30-story buildings filled with policy advisors from Deloitte to KPMG to Booz Allen to whatever replaced Arthur Anderson. They own that place.
Yeah. And along those lines, in the interest of, economic stuff, and Steve's not here to defend himself, so I don't mean, you know, about a week ago, I had a little chest pain, and I will tell you, A, I don't have an iPhone, and B, even if I did have an iPhone, it would not occur to me to price the blood draw for the troponin and the D-dimer I needed, but I was more interested in where I could get a blood draw for those two things in less than 3 days before I died.
Hey,
You know,
Dave,
the interesting thing about that too is putting doctor shopping, so to speak, in that kind of perspective does also have the potential to undermine and devalue the value between a primary care physician and their patient.
You got it. Absolutely.
Hey,
And,
Dave
you know, you
Feinwatz,
can't-
Dave
I
Feinwatz,
recently-
can you tell us about the Senate File 404 that passed both houses and the governor's signature and got killed in the dark of night?
Yeah, it's late, and I won't waste a lot of your time, but I'll make the story as short as I can. We had proposed legislation. When I say we, I got a bunch of public spirited minded senior citizens meeting in a church at night who I taught how to lobby and something about the program. And we had proposed that Medicaid patients should be allowed to choose fee-for-service Medicaid. And we authored a bill that would guarantee them this right, because all patients are shunted off into HMOs except for the disabled and the really messed up one, the high acuity patients that the HMOs don't want. Everybody else is forced into a managed care plan. We got a fiscal note on this bill. If patients chose fee-for-service, the state of Minnesota would save tens of millions of dollars because they wouldn't be paying HMOs to ration care and not provide it. The bill had bipartisan support, and it was killed at the 11th hour because Hennepin Health and HCMC, as well as North Memorial and a couple of other hospitals that are big 340B drug program centers, came in and said, we get our 340B drug discounts based on the head count of our Medicaid patients. And if these patients have the right to choose, we estimate that a minimum of 10% would flee immediately. And over a couple of years' time, they would all flee. And we need this 340B drug discount, not to give to the patients, but because we resell these drugs at retail. Hennepin Health and HCMC make $200 million a year doing this. And they said, you can't allow these people to choose fee for service. That's going to destroy our 340B program. And just so you know, HCMC is down to 3 days cash on hand, which means from a financial standpoint, and Wayne knows this, they're already dead. And this is an additional layer of complexity that most people have never heard of. And all it took was Hennepin Health going to legislators going, if you allow people to choose Medicaid fee-for-service as opposed to a managed care organization, we're going to close. The bill was instantly killed, and we were told it would never receive a hearing again. That's all it took.
The problem, David, is that giving Medicaid patients a debit card to go to any doc, if there was a civilization with doctors' offices like there used to be 30, 40 years ago, is that the doctors would still get paid 28 cents on the dollar, which means they're paying to see the patient. No. Is the same. Now, the grocer gets $100 when they buy $100 worth of groceries with the EBT card, and that's what doctors need to have, not discount.
Yeah,
there's no marketplace for those people to go. And also, Hennepin gets the $200 million to offset. They're getting underpaid for their Medicaid services too. Those patients cost them a hell of a lot more than what they get paid all the time.
Listen, Don, there's a couple of things. Number one, it doesn't work that way anymore. Most doctors, as our doctors with us this evening know, are now employees of large systems, and those large systems are not leaving the Medicaid program. They desperately need that participation in the Medicaid program. They're going to stay. So when I say fee for service, it simply gives the patient the ability to choose the provider they want to go to, and the provider takes that money because their corporate employer wants it. That's just a fact of life now. And secondly, for most of these patients, they desperately just want to get the care they want and don't want to be forced into this thing. And when you talk about Hennepin Health and what they're doing and going under, nobody audits their books and nobody knows. The $200 million in 340B money disappears every year and nobody knows where it goes because there's no accountability, because Hennepin Health is set up as a quasi-private public partnership and the county board has no more oversight. So when they provide open books and want to make that argument, let the taxpayers see, that's great. But right now, my view is, I don't care if the ground opens up and swallows HCMC. I'll sell popcorn at the Brussels.
Except that knife wound to your chest causing your chest pain. There's no trauma one place to go to.
Oh, I wouldn't go there no matter what. Don't worry about that.
I want to say that I really appreciated the mention of the ethical quandary that physicians are in the Minnesota Physician article. Interestingly, as I researched this for my telemedicine book, medical schools right now, there's a real dearth of ethics education. It's kind of incredible how little there is at a time when around 80% of physicians are now employed by corporations. I actually went to St. John's University, and the pre-meds are interested in, I'm going to try to teach an ethics class there. But I think we need to get to medical schools and work somehow on teaching ethics of the doctor-patient relationship to medical students and see what we can do even at that level. I also just want to quickly mention that I agree with the fact that I think having some teeth in a corporate practice of medicine law, we have one in Minnesota that I've read 6, 7, 8 times, which looks great on paper, but there's no teeth in it. And I think you've said this too, at some point, if we had decent corporate practice of medicine laws with teeth, we might not even need as much of unionization effort. I totally applaud the effort, but I think we really need to be looking toward getting some of those laws that actually have teeth.
Yeah, it wouldn't be that hard. Just take a test case and take that corporate practice of medicine doctrine for a test drive. Because the last case in Minnesota that I'm aware of involved group health. And they said, well, the world has changed and doctors now have to report to bean counters. I don't expect to see a different result than that.
How about if we require the heads of corporate medicine that are, supposedly leading us to take medical ethics classes?
Or hold
Hopefully
the
they'll learn
medical
something.
and be responsible to the medical board, Minnesota Board of Medical Practice, like we are when they hurt patients.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we had Professor Kennedy talk about professionalism 2 years ago with this group. And he's, as I said, he's very erudite. And I can reduce the Hippocratic Oath to one sentence. He does it in 10 pages. And it's much better the way he does it. But what I say is physicians have a covenant of loyalty to their patient, period. They don't have any other obligation. I think that's what I heard from everybody tonight. So I hope my one sentence will do it. And the only way I see to do that is to empower the patients in the public sector, give them the money, let them work in a retail medical market with that money on their debit card. And I
Without
think
price fix.
that can do it public. And I think the private sector is going to have to go back of necessity to the 2004 to 2009 high deductible health plans and HSA program. With that, they have tremendous savings. And I think of necessity, they're going to get back to that before we ever change the public programs.
Yeah.
That's my hope. Yeah.
We opened this meeting with a movie line, and I'd like to close it with a movie line. And the closing movie line is from The Untouchables. As Al Capone once said, you can get farther with a kind word and a gun than with a kind word alone.
Love it.
Dave, with that, I think we really ought to close this evening down. It's been so delightful to hear everybody's opinion tonight. And I can't tell you enough. Thank you enough. I will thank you in an email tomorrow, and I will ask you for narratives so we can put a book together on this. It gets the ice broken so the community, politicians, institutions can all start dealing with this problem of corporatization of medicine and the response of unions to it. Somehow we've got to address the problem of the corporatization. Thanks again, everybody. I'm going to shut the meeting down. I can't tell you how much I enjoyed you being here, all of you. Thank you.